Welcome to High Point University's Leadership and Life Skills series. Join us now as I interview Anders Ericsson, a psychologist who is internationally recognized as a researcher in the psychological nature of expertise and in human performance. He is also the author of the book Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise.
High Point University presents A Conversation with Dr. Anders Ericsson and Nido Cobain is a production of UNC TV in association with High Point University.
Hello, I'm Nido Cobain, president of High Point University, and I welcome you to this program. As has been our tradition, we invite some of the finest scholars, some of the finest thought leaders from across America and the world to visit our campus so that we can talk to them, dialogue with them, discuss with them some issues and matters that could be of interest to all of us, faculty, staff, and students. And today I have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Anders Ericsson. He is the Conradi Eminent Scholar of Psychology at Florida State University and widely known as the expert on expertise. Dr. Ericsson, welcome to High Point University.
Well, thank you so much, President Cobain.
What does it mean, the expert on expertise?
Well, it turns out today is 40 years since I moved from Sweden to the United States and started this research on how some people seem to be able to perform at a higher level. And over these 40 years, we've now been studying chess masters, athletes, musicians, ballet dancers, surgeons, all sorts of individuals, and we identified those who are performing again at a higher level, and then trying to ask the question, what is it that makes them different? And once we know what their differences are, we can start asking now, how did they become that different? And what are there particular types of practice activities that they engaged in, or how did they become that way? And if we could identify that, then we could also help other people realize how they might be able to improve their performance.
How long have you been doing this research?
Pretty much 40 years.
40 years. And did you conclude that there are, in fact, a set of 3 or 4 things, or 30 or 40 things, or is it a wider profile than that, or smaller profile than that?
I think our initial research, we were interested in general capacities of short-term memory that at the time when I arrived in the United States was really believed to kind of constrain individuals from higher levels of performance. So in collaboration with senior psychologist Bill Chase, we gave this a couple of students training on this memory task. And what we found was that over hundreds of hours, these individuals could actually improve their performance by over 1,000%.
Wow.
And I guess the key insight was, it wasn't a generalized capacity or ability that they developed. It was something related now to this specific memory task. So from that we inferred, well, if you can actually qualitatively change what you're doing in one task, that's now going to provide a method for individuals excelling in whatever domain they decide to excel in. And that, I guess, is the essence of what we're finding is, to understand how somebody excels, look at their history of what it is that allowed them to get to that point.
But you do refer in the book that there are some principles that you have concluded that when followed, one is more likely to meet their fullest potential or do better, perform at a higher level.
And I would argue that thinking about it, if you have individuals who are very successful and able to do something that you aspire to be able to do, try to understand what they specifically did. They provide kind of a map. So if you think of it as, getting to the top of a mountain, you could try it on your own, and probably you will find that you're going to run into all sorts of bad situations. But if you actually use the accumulated wisdom here of other people who've tried to climb this mountain before, and you know what kind of skills are necessary for you to overcome these problems and how you can find a path that leads you to that solution. So I think what we're arguing is look for a teacher or somebody who's actually been able to do this as a guide, so you don't really have to redo this. And then I think you will also realize that what they did, how they designed their daily lives, actually shows a lot of generalizable insights into how you actually can improve. I know a lot of people who, or at least some people who wanted to run a marathon, and they kind of go out and run, 4 or 5 miles, and then they're just totally destroyed, and they basically won't get any further. Well, you see, if you had a coach, you probably would, aim for a very gradual increase, because your body, in order to adjust to the demands of a marathon, has to be gradually changing. But if we've seen now thousands of people going through that process, I think we can now scientifically argue here that if you're willing to do this type of training, you're also going to see similar kinds of improvements. So accumulating that knowledge of how people got really good is something that I think I'm really excited about, and see that people are actually starting to do. I think in the past, people have been focusing more on the kind of biography of high points of a given individual, and maybe not so much on the daily procedures and what it is that these individuals did that maybe other people didn't do, that now ended up leading them to this very impressive performance.
They say we are what we eat, what we read, what we surround ourselves with. I choose to be extraordinary, and I get my start every day with daily motivation.
In our global economy where 1 million people can do what you can do, you have to compete with your differences. That's something extra that you possess. That something extra is your differential advantage, your DA. Are you passionate? That answer must be a resounding yes. Knowing and using and understanding your differential advantage will help you on your quest for excellence.
Sign up today to receive daily motivation, a short lesson each Monday with your video life coach Nido Cobain, and inspirational quotes the rest of the week. It's relevant, quick, and free. Choose to be extraordinary.
What are some of these general rules for such behavior, such training, that therefore led these people to do what they do so well?
One of the areas where we've seen the most research trying to pinpoint, what is it that explains differences in the level of play of chess players? We have very hard objective evidence, because we can see in tournaments who is beating who, and actually come up with a metric that is actually very accurate in predicting who is going to win when you're actually having two chess players who are playing against each other. Now, what the important insights, I think, were you need almost like 200 hours of videotaped matches to be able to get enough data to infer how good somebody is. But it turns out that in 10, 15 minutes, you can present individuals with chess positions that have been selected because they have a better move. And in those 10, 15 minutes, you can explain the vast majority of the differences between chess players. And this also allows you now to get a window into what is it that actually allows some people to pick the better move. And that's actually where my research started, was to think out loud while you were actually engaged now in selecting the move. Mm-hmm. And by analyzing now what it is that individuals think, you can now see the differences and see how better chess players are able to plan deeper. Basically they can, if I do this, what is the best counter move that somebody else is doing? And then do that to a depth of maybe 10 plies. And the other thing they can do is that they can, as they're analyzing, they can see weaknesses that would then allow them now to pick the best move. Now, if you believe that this is really the difference here between the great chess players and the less competent ones, then the next question is, how did these individuals become able to do this type of planning? And that's where we've now identified activities that individuals engage in. And one thing is, when you're playing a chess game, how would you know if you're actually doing the best move for a given position? And that was a big problem. So what people now discovered was that if you took games between world-class players, you could pretend playing against these world-class players. And you could kind of think about, what move would I do if we were in this situation? And once you committed to a move, you can now check and see, what did the world-class player do? And if he or she did something different, then basically you need to reconsider what basically you were thinking about and why did you overlook that possibility.
Where does intelligence, where does focus, where does resilience, you pick any traits you want, where do these traits enter into this discussion?
I think chess and a lot of other domains that we looked at that seems to be sort of intellectual, like music. And what's interesting is that if you're actually looking at beginners, you can find that the success of beginners on music-related tasks is correlated with IQ and other cognitive ability tests. But what's interesting is, as you get better, so you reach a high skill level, the correlations with IQ disappears. It is like you're building new structures that wasn't there that are now taking over and mediating your performance. And somebody would point to that once you look at how much time a really skilled chess player might engage in this type of chess study, one of the things we found is that there seems to be a limit. Even the very best people limit the amount of time that they spend to about 4 or 5 hours a day, no more than that. And the reason is that in order to be able to really push yourself to your limits, you need to be fully concentrated. So there's no way that you're actually going to gain anything by going at 50%. You have to select challenging tasks and then getting feedback about what it is that you need to kind of improve or adjust to now be 1 little inch better than you used to be.
Can you translate that to a life of a student on a campus? For example, I was not a scientist, right? So studying biology was very difficult for me. I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. Are you saying, therefore, that if I had discovered how people who are superb in biology, what are the systems, what are the procedures, what are the thought processes, what are the whatever, use your own words, that I may have done significantly better? Instead of studying for 8 hours, I could have done it in 4. What am I missing in that example besides the fact that God did not gift me with biology?
Well, one interesting thing that I've found when I've been talking to people who are really kind of meeting the criteria here for being outstanding is that when they tell me about their childhood, they tell me that they had this crisis of memorization where they basically said, I don't want to memorize things. I want to find ways that I can learn this in a more meaningful way, that it becomes part of me as opposed to something that I memorize and then I'll forget 6 months later. And I remember personally, I hated memorizing historical facts. So the way I solved that problem was to go to the library and read maybe 2 or 3 books about the same time period. That allowed me to score as well as those people who memorized the facts, because I could now relate all the information that I had learned here by reading the books. And that has been something that I've tried to live by. Anytime when there's a call for memorization, I'm looking for, is there a historical explanation that would allow me now to try to understand why this fact, and that also allows me to integrate it with everything else I know, and sometimes find kind of curious things that now leads me to go to the library and look at more things.
I see.
And I believe that if one could help students engage in this sort of meaningful activity where they were seeing how they are now able to lay the foundations and now add on to it. And I think that's one of the insights that we see in music, the importance of actually learning to play a musical instrument with the correct fundamental skills. Because if you learn how to play the piano by yourself, it's very likely that the way you're learning it actually maybe work well in the beginning. but it's not going to be the kind of thing that you can add on and modify and eventually now allow you to reach the highest levels.
Mm-hmm. Is it in your opinion that every human being, I know there's some exceptions, but generally, every human being is capable of being outstanding?
I would put the question as a scientist in the reverse format. Tell me what it is that would make it impossible for a given individual to reach a given level.
Okay, let me play with you this sentence which would have special meaning to our audience here today at High Point University. Is it possible for every individual in some way, at something, or in life in general, to be extraordinary?
As a scientist, I would say I don't know of evidence that would actually limit that. And by using...
Your answer is yes.
Well, as a scientist, I don't know of the evidence against it, but it also means that if somebody were to produce evidence, I would be willing now to scrutinize it and see whether that would actually...
But your work has been about discovering evidence to allow someone to be extraordinary, right? I mean, your evidence is about the chess player. How does the chess player become better? Pianist. How does the pianist become better, right? So there apparently is evidence that people can become extraordinary.
Exactly.
So it's yes then.
Well, you know, as long as we have that agreement here that, you know, there's some things we don't know. But I think one of the consequences of my own work that I've taken seriously is look at those people who criticize your work and actually now try to understand why people are raising issues. And are you in some ways a scientist first who looks at the evidence and respects people who present evidence? Because I think that's the only way that science will progress, is that you have that dialogue. And what we found is that there are some things that seems to be real limiting factors. One, for example, is that there's some attributes that training can't change, like the length of your bones. We know of no biological process that through training can actually change the length of your bone, so your height and other kind of aspects of the kind of length, where length of the bones makes a difference. We also discovered that there are developmental periods. If you don't actually have the kind of training that's necessary in a given period, it may in fact be almost impossible for an adult to achieve that at that high level. Things like perfect pitch seems like any child can acquire between ages around 5. At that period, the brain seems to reorganize, so you know actually process things in a more relative way. So perfect pitch becomes now extremely difficult to acquire as an adult. The same thing with ballet dancers, their joints. As the bones calcify, you will now have fixed joints. So the turnout of ballet dancers is something that you can, through training, modify at certain ages. But at later points in life, where your bones are now fully calcified, it's no longer possible.
So, Dr. Ericsson, to the viewers watching us right now, asking questions like, I'm in sales, and I really want to succeed. What do I do? Do I go look at what other salespeople are doing? Do I listen to my sales manager? Do I read books on techniques? Do I read Dr. Ericsson's work to determine what is the microcosmic essence of that 1 or 2 or 3 things that I must do, or must behave, or must believe, or must act upon to become the, I don't want to use the word expert, but to become quite fluid and fluent in that particular element. I also think about the parent who says to their son or daughter, you can be anything you set your mind to do. I said that to my own parents. We interviewed on this program Dr. Julie Fleischlag, who's the dean of this School of Medicine at Wake Forest University, who says her grandfather influenced her measurably when he said to her, Julie, you can do anything you set your mind to do. Don't listen to anybody who's telling you you can't. So I'm trying to translate clearly the scientific evidence that you have so masterfully been able to achieve, into the dailiness of life that affects how we rear children, that affects a faculty member, what they might or might not say in a classroom, that could impact and influence the very way someone's self-esteem might emerge or might evolve. Do you see what I'm struggling with a little bit?
Yeah, and these are big questions. So let me try to
yes?
I've been collaborating with Angela Duckworth and basically groups
the
interested
author of the book, Grit.
Right, yes. And really looking at what the school situation and how teachers and parents would be able to help students. Now, one of the things that I found the most interesting and the kind of the way here that some of the insights that we have of expert performers might inform more generally for individuals who are not planning to become world-class musicians or whatever, it is that during adolescence, if you engage in some activity like music, where you are now actually competing, so you actually are, in a sense, getting that objective evidence on what it is that you can do to improve. Mm-hmm. I believe that in the process, you now get a sense here of that you can do things that you knew you couldn't do. And then you also learn a lot of skills here about how to design your life. So when you're practicing, you're going to do it at 100% as opposed to, just kind of add hours where you're, doing things, at 25%. What we find is when I've been talking to surgeons who are especially successful here and have very good patient outcomes, they can point to a period during adolescence when they were either martial artists, musicians, or athletes, but all shared that kind of feedback loop of what it meant to actually reach a level of performance that was higher, and some insight into what it took. And I would argue that one thing that people don't maybe pay attention to as much is the motivational part. You need to be able to find joy in what you're doing. And as a surgeon, I find a lot of the surgeons interacting with the patients and actually getting a sense here that you can improve the outcomes of this patient's life in a way that many of your other colleagues couldn't do. That kind of motivational source, I think this really helps motivate surgeons now to put in that effort of trying next time they get an opportunity to do a better job. Coming back now to what you were talking about, the salespeople, I've been now in interaction here with 3 or 4 major companies asking exactly that question, but they were asking it from the point of view of the company. We're basically bringing in a lot of salespeople, only 20% of them are actually performing up to snuff, so now we've wasted a lot of effort here, company. So what is it that we could learn now from those 20% of individuals who are successful that could allow us now to help and maybe even give some feedback to individuals who want to do it, because we can predict some of the problems that they might have. And I think when it comes to sales, what I find is if you can actually listen to the customer and get a sense here that you're actually helping that customer to lead a better life in the process now of actually giving them some of your products, that is a more motivational experience. And if that type of personal interaction is something that really gives you something back, I would predict now that you would be more able to kind of perceive and make that effort of trying to understand what is it that that customer really likes. And could I possibly uncover something that they don't even realize, so I could offer them something that was even better than they thought they could get. So that type of activity, I think, again, here we haven't completed this work, so I don't have any scientific evidence. But looking at, for example, doctors who are working with somebody with kind of a long-term condition, to understand how that patient perceives their symptoms is going to allow the doctor to convince the patient to make the transformation much better than a doctor who basically just tells the patient here, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And that actually been supported in research showing
So, Dr. Ericsson, what you're describing can revolutionize so much of what we do in terms of our folkways, our behavioral patterns. So, a surgeon can go to school for 10 years and never have a course on interpersonal relationships or on understanding the word value in the context that the hospital or the medical provider thinks of it. And today, they're forced to think about that because hospitals, in many cases, lose money. And in many cases, they are challenged with that. Think about universities. In universities, we're now figuring out that if you're going to be in a competitive sphere, Hyper University is a private school. We're clearly in a competitive sphere. Competitive not only with other schools, but competitive with notions that people hold dear, like should I even go to college in the first place? Is college valuable in my life? What might a college education inure for me in my pursuit of success or my pursuit of excellence? So we're having to learn that, I'm just going to rephrase what you said. We have to learn what is it that parent values. We have to learn what is it that student values. Today we're finding out they value a lot getting a job, getting a return on their investment. And then we have to somehow correlate that with what the essence of a university is and what we've always believed all throughout our lives. And somehow find a mechanism, methodology to balance those two, or we die. We die a slow death, but we die. Right? There'll be other inventors of other vessels of delivery of education that will render us, not irrelevant, but certainly will render us less valuable. I'm proud to tell you at Hype University, we understand what you're talking about. We believe in all these things you're talking about, and our faculty and staff are amazing in this area. We do understand our students. We do have success coaches. We do have mentors. We do have faculty who guide and advise our students. We do understand that they want to lead to something in their way. But not every student, not every major is intended to lead you necessarily just for the acquisition of a job. So that's where I'm sort of want to get into your mind a little more. I know what you've said in the book, but I want to understand. So maybe the best way I could do is just give you some statements and tell me if I have been terribly misguiding people to the point of psychological damage. For example, we had Dr. Carol Dweck here, and I queried Dr. Dweck about some things I say to my grandchildren. And she publicly, on public television and before a very intelligent group of people who filled this theater, told me that I should cease to be a grandparent. Because what I was saying denied some of the methodologies, and she did it lovingly and kindly, but I got the message. I say things like this, and I've said them for years, and I really want your reaction. Please be honest. Just don't be nice to me. Just tell it the way you feel it, you believe it. I say, there are no such thing as unrealistic dreams. There are only unrealistic timelines. Now clearly, I don't mean that literally. I love basketball, but I cannot be Michael Jordan. Clearly. So in that case, that's an unrealistic dream, right? I love to read everything about AI and robotics and the future of the world, but I really don't have any leaning towards doing the kinds of things that Dr. Joe DeSimone does with carbon, for example. So those are, we'll put those as exceptions to the side. So generally, universally, when I say that to someone, a freshman sitting in this theater, am I misleading them?
Well, being personal here about my own experience with my children, my grandson, I would argue that my father always claimed that there was nothing that I couldn't do if I was willing to basically find the path to basically this.
That is what Condoleezza Rice's father told her. That is what many people who have achieved so much in life have been told. It didn't depend on empirical evidence. It didn't have scientific proof, but it enriched the soul. It gave hope. it motivated, it inspired a person to dig deeper, try harder, seek perhaps some of the things that you're talking about.
And I have a little anecdote here. When I was maybe 11 or 12, I was seeing a violinist play, and I was telling my father here, do you see that person play? The fingers were going just, incredibly. And so I asked him, well, can I do that? And then he said, well, maybe there are limits. And then he told me this anecdote of Paganini, where Paganini was able to basically play a piece even though his strings were breaking. Now, as I got older, I kind of revisited that. And it turns out that Paganini intentionally eliminated the strings. And basically, he had now rehearsed a piece that should be played on a single string. So I think, and I've been...
he cheated.
Well, he was, making a show. And obviously having the audience see how basically strings were disappearing, and he kind of continued, just seemed magical.
Yes.
But in this particular case, it was something that he designed to be impressive as opposed to. And I would argue that I've spent, my last 20, 30 years looking for even individual instances that would seem to be completely inconsistent with this view that performance is acquired by the right kind of training. I think it's very clear that individuals by themselves are not assured to be successful because the path that you select of actually achieving that performance may be incorrect. But if you're working with somebody who has actually successfully done it, or a teacher who has been helping other individuals reach that performance. So going back now to my children, I think I've been trying to tell them, if you're interested in some path, let's look into what it is that you should be doing in order to be able to do this. And
But you don't say that to a 3-year-old. They wouldn't know what the word path meant.
Well, I think I just play with a 3-year-old. But my grandson, I think is a kind of an interesting example. I was telling him, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to basically build a computer that's going to be better than all my friends that I'm playing video games with. And I told him, if you're willing to build it, I'm willing to pay for all the components. So he spent 3 months on the internet trying to figure out how he could build that computer. And he was able to do it. His mother insisted that an expert would come and look at it before they, hooked it up to the electricity. But it worked. And I think the more that you, as a parent, can actually facilitate for individuals to set those stretch goals,
yes.
That, I think, is more important than telling them that they're
great.
Inherently great already. And I think that idea of trying to do something that's difficult, because I think that is, once you've been able to overcome a difficulty 10 times, that gives you the kind of confidence that when you have a new difficulty, that there's going to be ways, and you're probably going to be learning methods that, like going to somebody like a teacher to help you now figure out how they were able to do something.
Dr. Ericsson, I have personally read, studied, I've even written on the subject extensively, and have lived the notion of leadership. What does it mean to be a leader? Who is an effective leader? Who's an ineffective leader? Who's a leader who inspires and grows people versus a leader who merely manages people? I have never met a leader, let's say in business, in nonprofit, I dare say even in education, who does not employ a significant sum of qualitative dialogue to encourage, to propel forward, to inspire to do it differently. And most of the time, it is not based in the Puritan, valuable, intelligent, more accurate methodology of which you and Dr. Dweck speak. So we're students of your work. I want to learn how you think because I see leaders every day in companies and nonprofits, wherever, who will say things to students or to people that are complimentary or are critical. But they are based on things like our own frame of reference. They're based on my own circle of awareness. And dare I say, and please disagree with me if you wish to do so, may I dare say that societal influences, socioeconomic conditions also play a big role in all of that. We know that kids who grow up in a wealthy family are more likely to get an education, more likely to be wealthy. We know that kids who grow up in challenged families, economically, socially, etc., are less likely to become wealthy and extensive research has been done in these areas. So these are external factors that employ non-scientific data that influence and impact people, right or wrong, it's not my point, every single day. How do we change that? How do we learn to do what we do more precisely, more accurately, lest we somehow mislead, misguide, and create disservice?
And I've been interested in this issue, and I've been looking for exemplars, because in all sorts of activities, if you have individuals who want to achieve a goal, if you could actually have a video diary of how somebody actually got from point A to point B, that I think would be just making it a lot easier to have a vision that goes beyond sort of this more naive sense here of I want to be, Tiger Woods or something like that. But basically taking a look here at what is it that Tiger Woods was able to do here at age 10. And if you don't have the strength, you don't have whatever, then that should be something that you need to work with your coach to kind of achieve. But that kind of having that path, and I think documenting individuals in your university of somebody who is disadvantaged, who is able now to succeed, instead of just celebrating kind of the end point, you would document kind of the day-to-day kind of problems that they overcome or the support that they were getting, and then thinking, how would we be able to scale this in such a way that more individuals would be able to succeed in this way?
Yes, very logical. I understand. Tell us about what you learned from London cabbies.
Well, one of the kind of important things is that people for a while believed that the brain, more or less stopped changing when you were in adulthood. So the rest of your life, you could just more or less, add knowledge and stuff like that, but not really change it. So we've been looking for examples of individuals who can dramatically improve their performance as adults. And in the book, we talk a little bit about that memory training, which is an example here of how a large number of individuals have been able to dramatically improve their performance. But then we also went out and looked at examples in real life. So cabbies, in order to pass a test, they have to memorize now some 20,000 streets in Metro London. So they actually would be able to respond when they're being tested. If you're at point A and want to go to point B, what is the best way of getting there? And it typically takes individuals in the order of 3 to 5 years to master that knowledge. And what the research showed is that the brains of these individuals who actually went through this process changed, indicating here that it wasn't just that you were stuffing more knowledge. There's flexibility and modifiability in the brain that allows individuals, even as adults. And just one other little interesting thing is that IQ was really not predictive of those individuals who were able to successfully complete this task versus those who, for various reasons, decided not to continue.
What is Uber going to do to all of that? What has Uber done to all of that?
That, I think,
I don't mean just the cabbies, but I mean in general, vis-a-vis the evolution and enhancement of one's memory?
And I think that is a really interesting question. What are the skills that where you're actually using now the computer as a tool as opposed to, basically having to memorize information? And I think that gets back to this issue of what's the value of memorize individual pieces of information if you can access them Googling. So what we really need to focus in on are the things that enhance your ability now to perform with the computer as a tool, as opposed to this idea that you should do something that the computer actually can do better.
Mm-hmm. What about the 10,000-hour rule?
Well, and I think that gets at one of the most central questions that I want to emphasize. People often have believed that if you just do something for long enough, you become an expert. And they almost use it as a definition that you're an expert. Now, once we started looking at the performance of individuals, we found that there was hardly any correlation beyond the first couple of years between how long you've been doing something and how well you could do it. Now,
so excuse me, so might I deduce from what you just said that experience, therefore, may not be a plus, it may be a minus?
We found that experience by itself doesn't seem to improve performance beyond the initial phases where you're making so many mistakes that you get that immediate feedback. And once you get into a professional environment, a lot of people just keep doing what they've been doing. And that's where this idea here of deliberate practice, where you actually take somebody's performance and then give them feedback about how they could do it better. And there's different ways to do it. I mentioned that world-class chess games where you could compare yourself against those players. I think you could video record yourself as a teacher and maybe bring in another teacher who would actually be able to comment on, you did this great, but, it seems to me that several of the students didn't really understand that. So that idea of identifying now something that you can improve, and then the question is, how do you go about making that change? And what we find is that, in many domains, you just doing it once and told that you should do it differently doesn't change the way you're thinking about it. Mm-hmm. So if you want to change how you're actually thinking about this concept, so next time you talk to students, you're going to actually be thinking about it differently. There needs to be sort of a training that gives you ideally immediate feedback where you can actually try it out until you've now made that change and now incorporated that as part of your regular performance.
On this campus, we are focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. There's a growth mindset in our institutional DNA.
Hi, I'm Steve Wozniak, the Woz, and I'm proud to be High Point University's Innovator in Residence.
Hi, I'm Byron Pitts, High Point University's Journalist in Residence. Welcome to HPU.
I'm Mark Randolph, and I'm proud to be the Entrepreneur in Residence at the premier life skills university, High Point University.
So you say potential is an expandable vessel shaped by what we do in our lives. And you refer to Carol Dweck's work. Is that consistent with what we just said or somewhat inconsistent with what we just said?
Well, I think it's consistent with this idea that you're building new skills that actually now go beyond whatever you actually had initially. And the quality of your ultimate performance will be a function now of the quality of the construction of that kind of house that will now basically be the mediator of your better performance.
You refer to Ben Franklin using the 3 F's. What are they?
So basically, we identify that cycle of improvement where first you have to find something, specify that you want to change. Then you have to basically focus on it with a training task that ideally a coach would actually tell you about so you can monitor how basically it's improved. And then basically by repeating, you will actually fix it to get now enhancing, so you're doing it differently. And I've been working with some team coaches, and what's interesting is that when they asked various volleyball players to tell the coach, what they were supposed to be doing when there was a problem, the coach realized that the way they were thinking, the athlete was thinking about what they should be doing was incorrect. So providing that feedback loop of establishing now that the athletes is on par now with the goals of the coach, he ended up being able now to design training where the athlete would now get that immediate feedback to make that correction that then, could basically be incorporated in their regular performance.
Yes. Let me read a couple of things from your book, Peak, Secrets for the New Science of Expertise. You say the brain, like the body, changes most quickly in that sweet spot where it is pushed outside, but not too far outside its comfort zone. Define the sweet spot.
I think that's the key here to any kind of change, is that somebody knows, what is that change that is possible. I mean, sometimes if you're playing golf or something, if you hit the hole 10% of the time, you have a sense here that those 10 times, if you could increase that to 30%, that would be sort of the appropriate. But trying a task that is actually outside of anything that you can do is just demoralizing because, so for example, if you want to try to do polyrhythms on the piano after only like a couple of years of training, everything suggests here that you're going to be not successful. So making that effort is going to basically be a waste. And it may be demotivating, even almost confirming that you can't do it, when in fact, if you actually had selected the path that teacher would have recommended, well, then you would just have to wait a number of years before you would be ready and have all the necessary fundamental skills acquired.
So is it fair to say that, therefore, human potential is not endless?
Or at least we don't know.
So that's not a yes. You see all kinds of people. I won't name them, but there are all kinds of people running around the world doing all kinds of very expensive seminars talking about unlimited potential, that you can do anything and everything. If you just learn these things, you can become the wealthiest, you can become the happiest, you can become whatever. Your research does not necessarily suggest that everyone can do that. You say it's unknown because there's no scientific evidence to yes or no. I get the point. But my potential is not endless in the sense that there are activities and there are certain pursuits that regardless of my motivation, my focus, my intelligence, I will be incapable of achieving.
I would want to encourage the development of a science. So instead of making these claims, and it's not even clear what evidence would be accepted here as rejecting those claims. But I think, for example, I feel reasonably confident that nobody can fly just with their arms, how much they train.
Right.
So that would be an example here of a limitation. You probably wouldn't be able to jump more than 10 meters up in the air without any help. Yeah. So my feeling is, why not look at what the best humans are able to do and then help individuals come to that kind of borderline of what's currently known to be possible. That puts them now in the best possible position to go a step further and actually now help us all see that certain things are possible that weren't known to be possible.
Provided they have inclination or interest, right?
And it's sort of, we're not going to all be able to be astronauts and go to the moon. So we're going to have to find those individuals who have that motivation and that drive that are willing now to kind of do the kind of training that sometimes is going to be pretty effortful. And I would argue that in my case, when I see people not realizing what I think they should be able to do, it's because they decide that they're not able, willing to do the kind of things that are required, which leaves it unknown if I had ways here motivating them to do it, would they be able to do it? My belief, but as a scientist I wouldn't know, is that they could be able to do it.
Dr. Ericsson, I got to tell you, I've been at Hype University 14 years. When I would write letters, for example, president's letter in the magazine for Hype University, I would use all kinds of adjectives and all kinds of descriptions. And I would run this letter by a certain Dr. Jeff Adams, to which he would then, in the margins, ask me all kinds of questions. How do you know it is so? What proves this point? What data might you have? So I've solved this problem. I don't talk to the guy anymore. That's just But you know what I found? I found that is a beautiful stress, in a positive way, stress in the dialogue, that when someone pushes you to prove a point or to find data to sufficiently give that point some reasonable claim, makes us better people. Makes me think more vertically, more diagonally, right?
Right, and I've been working with some companies who have managerial projects where they're identifying, promising individuals. And one of the things that came out when I was speaking to this group was that there's a lot of letters of evaluation. This individual, seems not to respect the people, but not a listing here of behaviors that actually would now allow one to design a training program to help this individual correct this deficiency, and also in some ways prove to the management here, I've now been able to deal with this issue. So by keeping it at that verbal level, it's almost like you're almost limiting certain individuals from thriving and being as successful as they can be.
I agree completely. Almost all performance appraisals in organizations, to some extent, commit that error. You pass a judgment on someone, 1 to 5, tell me if this person is, exceeding expectations, meeting expectations. It is so subjective. So what's intriguing about this discussion, and I admire very much that you keep going back to the essence of the science of it all. And what you're saying is that we really can't back up a lot of our behavior. Even the best leaders who think they're doing a marvelous job could learn measurably from the notion that we don't know that particular thing will lead to this particular thing, and therefore we need to dig deeper. Let me dig a little deeper with you. You talk about the bent twig effect. What is that?
So that's a phenomenon that people were talking about, that if you have basically a little tree and you bent it, it will actually now influence its remainder of its development, so the tree will be going this way. And I guess I would argue that some of the findings here with the turnout of the ballet dancers, that there are certain kinds of localized changes that may actually now have long-term effects. And I think we're just starting to understand a little bit about what it is that children could learn, and what it is that could potentially now be helping them, and preparing them for success in adult life. And personally, I think some of the differences here between, as a function of income, may actually be due to the kind of environment that children are growing up in, such that some children will be given challenges that will actually prepare them better now once they get up in the school age.
We had on the campus of Hype University as a guest the co-founder of Twitter. And he used the term that you use in your book on page 157. And in fact, he told a story about how one must manufacture his or her own opportunities. That is what you've said here as well. What do you mean by that?
I believe that it's kind of key that you are going to be an individual once you make a choice, you will now explore and try to find the path that basically would allow you now to achieve that goal. I find a lot of college students who basically are just looking for what they're good at. And I tell them, you're much better off picking something and then use that as a tentative goal and now acquire skills. If you come across something better, you switch. But it's not like you're wasting your time just waiting here to see what you're good at. And I believe the people that I've seen who are successful, they would be the ones who are constantly having a goal. And just looking back at myself, I think I've changed goals many times. But having a current goal and then changing it to something that's even more appropriate, that I think is something that should be encouraged. And in some ways, whatever a parent or a teacher can do to kind of help somebody making a commitment to, changing and developing, that will give them all sorts of benefits down later on in life.
Dr. Ericsson, that's a very powerful point you just made. On page 172, I want to read something for you. You say another key motivational factor in deliberate practice is a belief that you can succeed. In order to push yourself when you really don't feel like it, you must believe that you can improve. And particularly for people shooting to become expert performers, that you can rank among the best. The power of such belief is so strong that it can even trump reality. Really?
What I was trying to say there is that having the belief that you can improve, and I think that's where the teacher comes in. Having a teacher telling you, basically giving you a roadmap about what it's going to be taking for you to reach that goal, that basically is a key. And I don't know, I think the reality refers to your current, so if you're struggling, that basically may be interpreted here as a sign that you can't do it. But having now the assurance by a teacher and having seen examples of other individuals who went through very similar troubles, and I'm really excited about now with the opportunity with video and other ways that people could actually document. And if they were interested, you could actually see a diary of how they're going through. So other people, and then by indexing this, you could see 20 other people struggling with understanding a particular concept or something and seeing how they resolve that. And I think that kind of is extremely powerful to actually show individuals when they're facing a difficulty that other people have encountered very similar things, and here are the paths that allow them to succeed.
You are making a difference in the world, sir, by expanding our mind, enhancing our thought processes, and allowing us all to believe that the tomorrows of our life could in fact be better than our yesterdays. Thank you so much.
Well,
for being
thank you.
at
It's been an honor.
Pleasure to have you.